Welcome to the Digital Forester Podcast, where we talk to foresters about how they are using digital technologies in their day-to-day forestry work. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Digital Forester Podcast. Today, I am joined by Rolf Schmitz. He's the co-founder and co-CEO of CollectiveCrunch. Rolf, how are you doing today?
Very well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for very well. Thanks for joining us. And it begs the question I always ask, where are you joining us from?
Yeah, so usually I'm based in Germany, but I'm actually calling in from Finland. We have a Finnish-German company, and I'm in Espoo, which is outside of Helsinki.
Very cool. Very cool.
Hijacking my co-founder.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. So when I look at this and your background, I was like, us North Americans have boring backgrounds. You have like the cool office. So for our listeners who can't see on the video, there's a cool sofa, L-shaped, a big TV, an electric guitar, of course, the mandatory whiteboards per se, but it looks like an awesome space to co-create there. So thinking of your role, I always ask as well, people are used to this in this podcast. Tell me about your journey into forestry, and then we'll deep dive into who CollectiveCrunch is, how the cool things you're doing, honestly. But maybe to start us off, tell us how you got into this forestry space in general.
Yeah. So long time ago, 2015, 16 or so, co-founders, we ended up in Munich having dinner, and we were discussing things to do more exciting than the jobs that we had at the time. And the idea came up, what if you combined climate data with business processes? The climate is changing, it's having a big impact and so forth. And that was sort of the initial, wow, this could work. And we then thought of going into sort of something like energy, energy markets, wind farms and things like that. We have a small product still running on that. We did something in logistics, but when we got to forestry, and we're not foresters, when we got to forestry, we realized, one, this is an industry that's at an early stage of digitalization, which is exciting. And the other thing, the forestry industry, if you look at forest inventories, it's inherently statistics. So it's ideal for machine learning, data science, those kind of things, because it's all based on modeling nature with statistics. And then, taking more powerful statistics, machine learning, that could work. And so that's kind of what set us into forestry. And of course, it's a fascinating topic. It's a topic where modeling nature is incredibly complex, but it's also fun. It's beautiful. Look at your background. It's just an exciting thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So for our listeners, I have my virtual background of a cottage out here in the just west of Ottawa here. We're not quite there yet, but I'm trying to mentally prepare myself by saying we're almost into summertime. So I'm curious. I love that story because sometimes the best ideas come from dinner or even maybe at the bar. There's often pens, napkins, often there's no paper around. So tell me about these people. Like, these were people you knew beforehand, you had history, you kind of knew each other, obviously entrepreneurial nature. I love when you say, we're not quite happy with our day job, so we're looking at other ideas, and that's often that initial spark. But thinking of that, it's like, was that really, as you said, it was just one of those moments in time where now you look back and go, like, that was the genesis of CollectiveCrunch?
It was kind of the genesis, and we're three co-founders. Christoph is Austrian, living in Berlin. I'm German, living in Munich. Jarkko lives in Finland. And we've been debating for some time, what to do together. And these guys, I'm an engineer by education, but these guys are more technical than I am. So we've been discussing for a while, and they'd come with ideas, and I just quietly sit there and think, like, I'm not really understanding it. And so you kind of think, if I don't understand it, what are we going to do about this? But that was the moment when it sort of came together. Christoph is very, very deep in business intelligence, which then kind of merged into data science and sort of more complex and powerful tools. Jarkko has a deep product background. He built and ran really complex software solutions and things like that. And I have a business development background. I worked and worked with global teams, ran global teams and things like that. And so it's not it's not intended to be disrespectful to who we're working at the time, but we've been basically thinking it would be cool to do something together. And a crucial thing when you do a startup, I think, is you need to think about the skills you bring together. And And we have actually three fairly different mindsets. These guys are a lot calmer than I am, so they calm me down a little bit. And there's some funny personal dynamics there as well.
Yeah, well, that's amazing. And as you know, in the startup world, awesome, what is it? You need the hustler, you need the hacker, and you need the money guy per se,
Right.
the three stools. Whether that
Yep.
holds or not, we'll see. But so very cool. So you're the co-founder, co-CEO. So maybe for our listeners, again, very cool. You're Europe, different people in different countries, and you're calling in. I'm in Canada. We're doing this audio call as if we're side by side. Amazing what technology can do today. But introduce us to CollectiveCrunch. I myself, I'm dying to learn more. As I said, I'm not as familiar with what you guys do, and I know there's different lenses of it. But take a moment to introduce the world to CollectiveCrunch.
Sure. So we take any amount of data, put it into GIS system, and then model it with machine learning. And if you think of, the ways, the methods that are being used in forestry to model forest inventories, to make decisions in the broadest sense possible, there's a couple of methods that are around. There's sampling around. In Northern Europe, actually, a lot of Lidar flying is being done, some of it public. In other parts of the world, you'll have some private Lidar flying going on. You have, of course, satellite imagery and satellite data more broadly. And all of these methods have advantages and disadvantages. And what we've found quite often is you have companies that offer their skill set, be it Lidar and just Lidar, and drill really deep into that, which gives you all the benefits of Lidar, but also, unfortunately, all the aspects of Lidar that are maybe not that great. And so we are not we don't have a specific focus on any method. Basically, it's, any data set we'll take, and we model based on that. So we've got, layers upon layers. Our analytics solutions got 150 layers or so. Wow. Not all layers are equally important, but what I want to emphasize here is we integrate anything really, and sort of this thing, we scale it probably on a level that is at the moment in forestry unprecedented. So we have 18 million hectares, which is sort of 40 million acres roundabout, covered in the system today. Forest inventory, species, maturity, dimension classifications, all the things you need to make forest management decisions, all of the things you make harvesting decisions, reporting, and those kind of things.
Yeah, very, very cool. And so at the start, you mentioned, none of you are foresters by training, but obviously working in forestry and space. And so when you describe what CollectiveCrunch does, Rolf, was there challenges in terms of getting, you're laughing because you know where I'm taking you. What were some of those challenges in terms of messaging this and explaining to it? Because again, there's a lot there, like, even though you described it so eloquently, for our technical listeners, I'm sure they're already like, oh my, there's this and that at play, versus some of our general users might say, oh, that sounded great, but the technical sophistication maybe not be fully appreciated. But what was your experience early on? Because I think, was it 2017 you guys were
2018 we started on the forestry thing in earnest. I think the kind of the thing you build from that kind of gives you energy and momentum is there's a lot of excitement around AI. You say AI, it's a bit like blockchain. You use the word and everybody's going to say, oh yeah, really. But then it's actually really hard. So, Elon Musk generated over exuberance about what AI can do is with us. It's a fact in life. There's some good in that because it brings people to listen to you. But the reality that then hits you is it's actually really hard to do. I remember actually our lead data science at the time, he's not with us, he went to another company at some stage. We were 3 quarters into the first real modeling exercise. And actually in the meeting, he says, I'm not sure it can be done. so at that stage,
a little bit of sweat on your forehead now, right? Like, oh boy.
Really taken aback slightly. But I mean, you need to listen to engineers, right? Otherwise you're doomed. I mean, I firmly believe that. And so we thought it through again from first principles. And we said, the information is there from an information perspective. It's on the border, but it should be doable. And actually 3 months later, we've done it as a proof of concept of a bit under a million hectare area in Finland. And so it's doable, but it was definitely on the threshold of what's practically doable. And an aspect of it is what happens in the Nordics is they use cut to measure harvesters. Yeah, these things grab the tree, cut the tree, and when they rebranch the tree, they measure very accurately. So error rate of 1-2%. And that's the best source to calibrate such complex models like we have it. But that information was only just becoming available. So it's always clear the more of that becomes available, the better the models will be and so forth. And so we were pretty clear we could get there. It was more a question of when, is there enough data to drive the models to the accuracy we needed. And another aspect is you don't sell something to the Nordic forestry industry faking it while you're making it, or being unclear about your accuracy. This is a very, very solid industry. And so we went through some serious rigor about what's the accuracy, what's working, what's not working. And that was early on, that was a pretty significant challenge, because we would go nowhere if we would not beat the models they had at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can relate. I'm sure it's like, Rolf, it's like, but this is how we've always done it.
Right.
Right. So yeah, you're laughing.
Fair enough. I'm not blaming anybody, right? You need to serve your customers. Yeah.
Yeah. But meanwhile, it's like, but I have a better way of doing this. That's faster, is more cost effective, and is more accurate and precise. But that's part of the journey. So I want to address maybe the elephant question in the room is often when we think about machine learning, and you're right, with AI, blockchain, if I'm baking a cake with the kids, I'll be like, oh, did you add some AI into that, cake? And they're like, what? I'm like, yeah, just keep going. Everyone uses it in general ways, often maybe inappropriately. But one of the things with machine learning or AI in general is it's a black box. And so a lot of people, and I suspect you probably bumped into this as you're trying to do that extension or that knowledge transfer, that forced biometrician says, yeah, but Rolf, it's like, how did it get to this output? It's like, you need to be able to explain it to me. You can't tell me it's a black box. Do you see that really as a problem, or do you think that's an objection or excuse for people to resist the change? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the thing that helps in that is that, as I said earlier, foresters are actually, at least the forest inventory people in forestry, they know their statistics. So, they have a really good basis of understanding sort of what happens in principle. And you need to explain to some degree what it is you're doing, but of course you need to be also mindful of your intellectual property and things like that. So overall, we've been trying to steer that debate towards what's the outcome of the black box? What are you getting here? And really focusing on the verification of that. And of course, in machine learning, there are methods to prove the accuracy, and all of that exists. And to really focus on what's the outcome? What are we actually giving you? And new customers coming in, we're just coming to the end of one pilot project. We go through that very rigorously. What's the confidence interval? What is the accuracy of each and every parameter to make sure the customer has that? And they're actually on the project level that we're dealing with, they're pretty clued up about statistics. And so in that sense, they don't know what the black box does as such, but they're very, very clear about directionally what's happening inside there, and particularly about what is the outcome that you get. And I think the outcome is the thing that, of course, we need to be very, very transparent. We work scientifically on this, and we're very, very open about the outcome.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Because I often joke for the people who drive, Elon's Teslas, who buy the FSD, the full self-driving. You don't sit there and go like, I need to understand how that black box drives the car. You just drive the car and you're excited, and maybe it's because it's Elon's products. You just don't care. You trust it by default, which is probably a problem on its own. But at the end of the day, it's kind of funny when you really draw the criticisms. I shouldn't say criticisms, the concerns from the forest industry or foresters on some technology. Is it a function of just foresters historically are the hackers, they're the hustlers, they've done it all and understand the land base, the natural asset, and by default they're just curious people and want to understand things, and it's frustrating when it's something that you really need an engineering degree or some advanced data science degree to go from. So thinking of the tech stack, again, digital forester, technologies, you're a vendor, you've got cool technology. Maybe walk me through. I'm equally curious. The products I see online around Linda Force, Linda Planet, Linda Metrics. And then I said, you know what, instead of reading this, I'm just gonna ask Rolf while we're on the call to give me the crash course on what each one is and what they're for.
Yep. So three things are there. Linda Metrics is basically for your own forests. You get all the transparency, all your parameters, what's the wood mass, what is the species mix, what's the maturity, all of that to manage your own forest better. And that's sort of how we got into this market. And what the Nordic forest industry was telling us, if you could do this better, it would help us. And that's Linda Metrics. It's for your own forest. Any parameter that you could think of, we can effectively model, or if it's something really far out, then try to model and have a conversation about. And while that was happening, the large customers were saying, but we're also, one, occasionally buying forest, and we're also buying raw material that isn't in our own land. So we'd like to have a model that isn't just our land, but also the lands around and elsewhere. And that is Linda Scout, because scouting is the term that's quite often used for, scouting for something specific. If you have a big mill, you're scouting for the right kind of material, raw material to buy. So that's Linda Scout, you're outside of your own area. And the third one, which I really want to emphasize, as far as we make it out, is Linda Planet. And so there is, the climate is changing. It's a significant issue that we're facing, and forestry can be a significant part of the solution. And so, forests are the cheapest and most efficient way of getting CO2 back out of the atmosphere. So Linda Planet is intended for projects that are sustainability projects, that are climate projects, to have the metrics to track the development of your wood mass, which equates into the CO2 that you've sequestered. So that's a big tool. But I have to say that this whole climate carbon side of forestry is less digitalized than the rest. I mean, these big companies that have been around for a long time, they understand what Linda Metrics is, fine. They look through the accuracy, great. They understand what Scout is for. They look through the accuracy, great. But when you go to the carbon industry, then it is much more still sampling, manual. We want a forester to see this before we believe it. Admittedly, there's a lot of greenwashing going on in that part of the in that sector, if you like. And we're trying with Linda Planet to bring rigor to that, and numbers-based, science-based information to that, with a very, very clear, articulated and understood confidence interval. Because the more narrow your confidence interval is, basically the better your business plan is.
Right. So definitely, I feel like Rolf, you're touching on the ESG a little bit. Its influence driving a bit of climate tech, and we've seen even recently some investments into different companies and their Series A and B, and pushing that forward. And I like your term, the greenwashing, the magic there. But when you say that, the large company, like a lot of these tier ones, these large enterprises are well established, and it may not just be the forestry company, right? It could be a tier one elsewhere in other sectors looking to buy carbon credits. But what do you feel like? So obviously I agree there's a push in climate tech, and it's maybe changing the narrative or the discussion around forest from their traditional wood products and whatnot, and even bio products per se, into a different climate tech space. But do you feel like the forestry world is ready for that? Do you believe the people around that ecosystem are really ready, or do you see the ups and the downs, I guess? Because again, when you talk about Linda Metrics, Linda Scouts, like we'll deep dive into that tech a little bit more. But when we go to that planet side, like this is a big issue, and there's a lot of players out there. We also know from our experiences, not all players are equal. There's different stories that are being told, some fully transparent, others maybe not completely. But where do you see some of those challenges, I guess, and opportunities in that space for forestry and foresters in the climate tech space?
Yeah, so I think there is a big driver behind all of this, which is McKinsey and others have projected that this market will grow, I think, 15-fold the next 9 years. And then the number for 20, 30 years out, 25 years out is 100. Don't quote me on exact numbers, but there's going to be very significant growth in this. That's sort of carbon trading as a whole. You can argue a case that forestry will play a very significant role in that. So you could actually project higher growth rates still. And I think what is daunting on the external, tier one players like, an airline energy company, the tech companies, what's daunting on them as well as the forestry industry is there aren't enough foresters to measure this thing by hand. There are just not. And so there is definitely some customers that we're engaged with that are saying, and by the way, there's a backlog. We need to do an audit, but we can't find, the forester to do the work. And it's sort of the whole Steve Jobs and the bicycle of the mind and so forth. I mean, we have to have better tools if we want to, get to that stage. And if there is going to be that kind of growth, which scientifically we need that kind of growth of, of either reducing emissions or taking, CO2 back out of the atmosphere. If you want to have that kind of growth, the current process will not hold. It's just completely impossible. There are not that many people that study forestry anymore. So it's actually the commercial companies, they're saying, we're finding it hard to keep staffing levels. And now you've got this huge growth thing in part forestry, where the forester is going to come from. And so our argument is, well, you don't need all that many foresters. You certainly you're not making them redundant, which is kind of socially a good thing, but we need to get better at this. And that's sort of the point that we're making here.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. Yeah, and I suspect you have tiptoed around the question of, well, are you suggesting, Rolf, we get rid of boots on the ground, right? Again, you're laughing because I know you've heard it before, and obviously we're not, as opposed to maybe those boots are doing something different than the traditional job. And
it's a non-trivial thing, right? I mean, I wouldn't want somebody to walk into this office and say, well, you're not needed anymore, right? So it's a question that's there. What we do see is, bark beetle, climate change has a significant impact on forests. So our story in this, and it's not just a headline story to sort of market it away, if you like. Our focus in this is we take away the routine, because it's hard enough to model just the forest inventory. We can't model the changes that are going on there, and bark beetles and other sort of damages, heat damages. We have fire is another one. You can do some risk modeling around that, but there is a lot that the forester can do other than measure trees on a regular basis. So I am honestly not aware of any even wildest out intention of getting rid of boots at the moment. I have not heard of that at all. I think it's about we're not keeping staffing levels up anyways, and there's a lot of routine. Why don't we take away the routine and let people focus on the value stuff? At least in forestry, I think that's very much, as far as I can look out, that's going to be the sort of context of it.
For sure. Great points. And I do laugh where a lot of foresters get worried or hung up on that questions. And then later on, when you talk with their companies, they're exploring truck platooning because there's a labor shortage. And yet that's okay. There's not concerns about the automation that might be bringing into there, but maybe it's just closer to their heart. So very cool. So I wanted to dive into maybe the Linda metrics and the Linda Scout, just from the, again, Digital Forester podcast is about technology. I know you mentioned, 150 scales and that, the tens of million hectares. So the 40s million acres type of thing. And you can tell I'm not good at doing that hectare to acre conversion live. We just kind of do around 2.5 type of thing for our other listeners. But maybe walk us through, again, not looking for, the confidential details of anything. But often we've had a lot of podcasts where Lidar is like the hot topic button. So is this something like Rolf from CollectiveCrunch, you must have airborne Lidar or terrestrial Lidar, or is it more, it's an option, and if you have it, great, but we have secret sauce that we can still do what we need to do without that? What are your thoughts on Lidar and how it's affected the forest industry?
Lidar is a great tool, absolutely. I mean, in terms of tree heights and such, it sort of does it on a significant scale. So it's fantastic data to have, no doubt about it. Generally, our experience is that Lidar is done every couple of years in the widest sense, because it's quite expensive. And so we are working in some sort of, countries, accounts where Lidar isn't stopped. It will just continue. It's great data points, and we model very accurately between. In other cases, people want to maybe do Lidar only in specific cases, and want sort of, because it's expensive, only do it on an as needed basis in very specific points. So the routine Lidar they want to get out of, and basically we help them with that. But overall, I think the point is, most of the companies have some sort of Lidar inventory. They might do sampling and really heavy sampling. We've seen some of that. They might do heavy Lidar, HBR data, so the data coming out of harvesters, which is something that the Nordics do, and in my view, Latin America should do a lot more of. Those are the sort of sources around. And we are well prepared to go into any of these scenarios and take the historical data that the customer has, and enrich it with all the data sources that we have to get to a better result. One is, in enriching it, you have an advantage of potentially getting better. The AI doesn't have the human bias that comes with sampling. If it's Lidar, you enrich it with optical, and you can work a little bit more around species, which Lidar is not particularly good at. And so basically, whatever the situation is, our strategy is to take whatever historical forest inventories the customers work with, enrich the data, model it, and see if we can come to something better. And so far, in every, we've got customers across Northern Europe. We've done projects in Central America. We've done in Spain. Give it some time, give it some effort, and we get better. Mainly because we combine data sources and you don't have the human bias. Those are big points.
Yeah. So thanks, Rolf, for that. So I guess thinking of some of our digital Forester listeners, I'm coming to CollectiveCrunch. That all sounds great. I listened to Rolf on the podcast. What like to get started? What are those things that they need to bring? And then I'll let you answer that first, and then I'm curious to take that question, then extend it beyond Scandinavia or the Nordic countries, because as you know, in that neck of the woods, right, we've got 3G, we've got coverage, 90% coverage. You come to Canada, I always joke, it's like we have more 0G coverage than coverage in general. So I'm curious to know your thoughts on that. What does someone have to bring to the table just to get going with you?
Yeah. So basically we're saying, let's look at what your forest inventory is based on today, and then take it from there, we enrich it. And that can be in Central South America. It can be heavy sampling. It can be heavy Lidar, and we take it from there. In the Nordics, these harvester data, HBR data, is sort of big, and we've built the tools to handle it. So we're basically saying to Latin America, why don't you start using those data sets? Because you've got the modern harvesters, you've got it all there, you just need to take the data out. And what then happens in an account, if there is sort of significant interest, we're still in the phase of development where we're trying to focus on early adopters. That's just the nature of the game. And there's an interest in AI, but there's also, and I think understandably, there is this, I want to see it before I really commit. And so what we offer there is then a pilot. We work around the pricing. We face a little bit of risk there, and are willing to take a little bit of risk there to basically sort of take usually 6 to 8 weeks, take the data in, enrich the data, use our models, get to a good point. And when you then go through the accuracy, this is what it exactly is, and you answer all the questions around that, then you have the discussion of, okay, we're now at a position where we consider going commercial, going into full application in the processes that we have. So that's sort of the way that onboarding of a customer will work. Or generally.
Very cool. Yeah, that's pretty fast turnaround, 6 to 8 weeks, right, from when you get the data and whatnot. I chuckle inside when you say they've got to do a pilot. It's kind of funny in my observation. No one wants to be the first but they also don't want to be the last in forestry. And it's almost like this tidal wave, right? You get the early adopters, the lighthouse accounts, and then suddenly it's like, Rolf, it's like, they're doing it with you. It's like, well, I want in, and it's like this domino effect. And unfortunately, that seems to be the name of the game in forestry. So I just wanted to pause because again, I'm always conscious of our listeners that some are coming from different spaces. Sure. Some don't even know forestry. I always joke about my sister, but you mentioned the HPR data. So maybe pause for a moment and introduce our listeners. Obviously we're going to the Stanford D side, but maybe pause and educate or share with our listeners when you say HPR, what does that really mean to you? And for the layperson, why is this so significant?
Yep. The HPR or harvester data is very, very accurate. And it is something that, if you use those kind of harvesters, it is basically, it's there. You just need to take it out of the harvester, which can be non-trivial. We talked about, mobile coverage. And the harvester information is being used in the Nordics for a couple of things. One is you pay on that basis. So you basically get a measurement report out of the harvester, and that's the basis for, okay, there's a supplier and a purchaser, and that's the basis of what's going to be paid. And that's very accurate. And but you can also use it for modeling to get the better results. So we're saying to Latin American customers, you have the harvesters, let's try to use that. Of course, you need to overcome the connectivity, which is a significant problem in Brazil. I mean, we've been told a couple of times now that these harvesters might be outside of mobile coverage, 80% of their operational use. But you don't need 100% of the harvesters if that's too complicated. If you can, a couple of them, and if you just run with a USB stick and somebody, takes it off, these harvesters are being serviced every now and then, of course. Maybe you just take it on at that time when the technician is at the harvester and you take it off there. It doesn't have to be real time like it is in the Nordics, but if you get to the point to start doing it, then you can derive a lot of benefits from the data. So that's sort of part of our argument. And the curious thing in Latin America, and I'm not a deep Latin American expert by any stretch, I'm not claiming that, but my understanding at the moment is that even the payment of the raw material is based on sampling. Now, sampling, truth be told, we're talking easily about 10% error rate. So we're talking to this person who's a landowner in Brazil, and he explains, it was something like 10 million cubic meters per year.
Yep.
Now, why would you use a method that's got 10%, easily a 10% error rate? And so if you think this through a bit further, then we're hoping, or we're not just hoping, we're not sitting here hoping, but we're trying to encourage a process where, particularly Latin America, who are using these harvesters, says, okay, let's make an effort to bring these data in and to make use of it in the widest sense. Get paid fairly, and use the data for modeling. And harvester data on a big scale, we've got millions of hectares of harvester data in the Nordics, so we've built internally the tools, the processes to handle them. And so we've now basically turned that around to say, well, dear Latin American customer, if you have a problem with handling it, we're more than happy to host your harvester data, but we're not going to solve the connectivity issue. We're a startup in the Nordics. We can't do anything about mobile networks. And, in Canada would be a similar argument.
Sure.
That's something that needs to happen there, but it doesn't have to be 100% day one. So we're basically telling our customers, let's start somewhere, and make use of this really, really important and extremely useful data set.
Yeah, very cool. So I'm curious, just from the Nordics to LATAM, or again, our listeners, Latin America. I'm assuming it's because in LATAM, like a lot of CTL with harvesters being used, and maybe other jurisdictions around the world, CTL is not. We've got feller bunchers that play in other areas that don't have the smart head. That's the thinking of going to LATAM. Okay, cool. So one of the things that I'm really dying to know here is that as you look at scaling things, there's always still this debate in terms of, like, Rolf, it's like, I already have a data center, right? You talk about 150 layers. It's like, but I got a data center. I don't want to put it in your data center in the cloud. I'm assuming it's in the cloud, but
Right.
What are your thoughts or advice on that from when we think about the on-premise discussion versus the cloud? Do you think it's really an issue? Does it matter? Or what are your thoughts in general about that space?
I mean, you have to listen to your customers, and you will, if you don't follow a route that they are broadly comfortable with, then you're making a big mistake. On one level, and just sort of as a sort of a motivational thing, not going into too deeply, but if you think of security, the cyber security aspect, then people, I've met definitely forestry people who feel more secure if it's on their servers. But if you actually look at the security routines and so forth of a cloud application, and be it an Amazon, be it Microsoft, versus you having a server somewhere in your own facilities, it's not a clear-cut thing. I mean, at all. That server in your, in your own facilities, is it, the latest patches? Is it really, security-wise up to date? I think another aspect of what you're bringing up is the right of use in data, and that is, of course, a very sensitive thing. We respect that, and you need a level of trust to get to a point where people are sharing such data. And I hope with the lighthouse customers and the credibility with customers that we've built, that we can take where we have the data sets from our customers to model better and enrich their data and so forth, that we can take that sort of level of trust in these references to go into new markets. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but there is very constructive debates around that. So I hope it's not a central issue. But it is something that I think it's a valid question. If somebody came to me and says, "Can I have your bank data?" I would say no. It's pretty sensitive. So it's something to be mindful of, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, it's a great point you make. Often it just comes down to the conversation and making sure people are understanding each other and working from the same playing field. So typically, before we go into maybe trends in technology, because again, I'm dying to know your view on the landscape there. I'm just curious, maybe to come full circle. This started, at dinner with a group of friends, colleagues, looking back at 2017, and you guys did a raise. I believe you guys did like a small seed raise. Oh, several of them. Okay. All right. So I'm missing that. Where are you guys at now? You did a seed, you've done a Series A as well, or?
So basically the several rounds that we did is that the European market, you go in smaller stages. So your valuation is a little bit more cautious than it might be in the US. So you're raising a little bit less to not be wiped out in dilution. You do a couple of rounds. So we've done 5 rounds, but some of them are, particularly the early ones, they would be in a North American context, they'd be laughably small. So we've done some fundraising. We've got, really investors that are excited about the company and backing us and so forth. And honestly, I forgot what your question was.
Well, so I was going to say, coming full circle, starting this journey and looking back from 2021, I actually had to pause and go, we are in 2021. 2021, and looking back to 2017. Are you where you thought you would be, or are you more like, wow, this is taking way longer, it's more harder? And if so, is it for the reasons maybe you anticipated? I'm just curious to know, that time warp, like where are you at? Are you surprised on where you are, or are you right on track? This is exactly what we thought.
I'll have to make this one up because I don't have the time to think about it. You're quite busy when you everybody of us is really busy building this beast. But I think applying to any startup that you speak to, I could imagine that there's a sort of a broad consensus. I thought this was faster. I thought this was not as hard as it turned out to be. It's definitely that. But broadly, my family was kind of saying, "What are you doing way back when, 2017?" I said, "We're going to do this and so forth." And I told my son, who was something like 12 around that time, you were debating it. I said, you got to know one thing: 90% of startups fail. And he looked at me like completely pale. And of course, they don't fail catastrophic. Probably half of them never get off the ground as such. But still, not failing is almost success in startups. I mean, you don't want to be a zombie company where everything is miserable. But it takes longer than you think. And the sheer solving the technical problem takes longer than you think. The customers coming on board takes longer than you think. We've got customers that we thought they're going to sign next week, add 3 months. And for reasons that are completely understandable. So unfortunately, it rarely ever is faster than you think. I mean, that almost never happens. It always takes longer. I think you have to have the patience. Actually, that conversation with my son, he was kind of flippant, why don't you do it? And I said, it's got to be 5 to 10 years of my life. It's pretty hard work. But the good news about it is it's enjoyable work. It's something you basically, you're creating your own thing, and you have a pretty strong influence in what's going on. So sure, it's definitely exciting, but these things take longer. I mean, maybe not if you're Facebook, but almost anything else. If you speak to a founder, I think they will say, I thought this was faster. I thought this was not as hard as it is.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, I'm sure your family looks at you. You've got the bounce and the step each day. You're smiling. You're enjoying
sure,
what you're doing, right?
I'm hugely enjoying it. I'm hugely enjoying it.
For sure. So traditional, as a tradition with this podcast, we often challenge our folks, our guests, to walk us through what a 1 year, 3 year, 10-year looks. You know, you touched on blockchain a little bit. It's a bit of the buzzword, or whether it's Web3 or crypto. And again, you know, crypto's like AI, right? You just say it, everyone gets in a frenzy for all sorts of different reasons. But when we think about, I'm curious to hear your views, because again, you're not a trained forester. You're coming as a technology company into the forestry space. And I'm sure you've scratched your head multiple times going like, oh my God, I can't believe this is how it's done, and it's still being used. But as you look forward, what are some of those key technological trends that you're keeping an eye on how it might influence Lynda Planet, Lynda Scout, and Lynda Metrics? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's the thing that there's kind of two things that are kind of part of the same coin, so two sides of the same coin. Sensors get better and better and better. They only get better. That's very, very clear. So, you know, if you think 5 or 10 years ahead, then, and you kind of factor improvements in resolution and so forth, and you project that, then satellites, remote sensing, satellite-based remote sensing is on a path that is only going to make it a lot more interesting. No doubt about that in my mind. And there's very, very exciting things happening there that you know, you see what's sort of being shot up in the next few years, or even now. Very, very exciting stuff. And then there's this sort of drone thing, which, you know, brings a completely different thing. And actually, satellites, before I go to the drones, you know, microsatellites, the stuff that's just, you know, constellation thrown out at the back of a bigger satellite.
All the astronomers will be screaming, complaining, more dots in the sky.
Sure, there's that too. And but very, very exciting stuff there that will really improve, and I think provide, you know, step changes in what we'll be able to do in 5 years' time, and that will mean more automation, better analysis, and so forth. And then there's the drone thing, which I think some people get carried away. You know, the key question is, how long can a drone that carries a lot of sensory equipment can stay in the air? And you get an answer that is sort of something under 2 hours. Well, that doesn't really scale all that hugely. And so there is an interesting case there, and we've actually acquired our own drone data last year. And it's very, very interesting. But where it is at the moment, drones, the way we look at drones is it's sort of for spot checks and things like that. Really, really interesting. But if you cast your mind out, the drone side, I don't think will go as fast as the remote sensing sensory side, because you're still talking about equipment, you're talking about it, you know, being kept in the air and things like that. But definitely exciting things going there in terms of broadly data acquisition. That's sort of from a pure technical side. And the thing that I'm, as a business person, I'm really excited about, and what I think is going to be the real change, is that at the moment you have the tier 1 forestry players that are actually pretty digitalized. They know what they're doing, they know where they're going, they understand what we have. But I think that will ripple through the market to the tier 2, tier 3, with standard products, sort of an easy access, standardized procedures and processes and so forth. There is some of that will answer questions that come, for example, out of the European Union, that basically wants to have a carbon budget country-wise, sort of for the entire continent on a per country basis. For that, you need data, you need intelligence and so forth. And at some stage that will probably change into maybe not a mandatory, but an encouragement to report your carbon budgets and things like that. And you need a lot more data acquisition to get to that point. And so there's one is the sort of need for it. And then there is this sort of huge improvement since forever, basically, but particularly since the arrival of the iPhone, smartphone, where sensors get smaller, much more powerful. And we see that really just on its trajectory and continuing. So there's going to be a lot more stuff coming.
Very cool. So on that line,
yep, sorry. Go ahead.
On the lines of remote sensing, I'm just curious. A lot of people ask me, it's like radar. What are your thoughts on radar? There's more interferometric SAR, INSAR, IFSAR coming online. Is that something that excites you, or?
Yeah, no, definitely. We'll take it, whatever it is. And you have bits and pieces where the data sets you have don't give you the answer. And curiously, in some of these cases, radar does come into that. So, we're really sort of data integration. Let's put it all into the system. So radar is something that we are really excited about. There's things like, if you have storm damage, there's cloud coverage, optical might not really help you. It might not help you for stretches of days or weeks. There's radar. And so hugely interesting, absolutely. I am actually not super cognizant on what the trajectory of radar is in the next couple of years, but it's definitely a data set we look at.
For sure, absolutely. So blockchain, any I gotta ask, because you're a tech guy, right? So we gotta nerd out a little bit here. Blockchain, what do you think on that? Is it coming to forestry, chain of custody issues? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's going. I used the term earlier just as a buzzword, in terms of here as a buzzword, but of course there is this line of thought and this sort of endeavor of moving forest assets to tokenization. And there is definitely a couple of things that are happening in the carbon space, if you like. There's a couple of sort of really interesting players. Some of them we're engaged with. I can definitely see it coming, but I wouldn't put a year on it, because there's some reason for. So on some unanswered question, I don't want to say skepticism, because we have to overcome our own customer skepticism. But there's a couple of things that need answering. And one of it is, if you take the tokens and just put them out there and they become part of carbon trading, the bigger issue is actually, does the forest that's represented by this token still exist? So it solves it solves a problem, no doubt about it. But I think the bigger problem is elsewhere, which is, does that forest still exist? Has it burned? Has it been cut and so forth? Which is why we're focusing on this space and not the blockchain space at this point in time, because we think that's the harder problem. It's the more pressing problem to understand at scale what's going on in the forest. And we are definitely interested, and we're sort of game planning it a little bit in terms of what's our route there. Is there going to be a dominant player that we attach into? Do we build we're very big on APIs and try to really provide APIs into QGIS, Ed3 and all these people. And, is there sort of an API play to be had to dock into the future leading blockchain tokenization of forests? I'd love that. I'm not sure that we would do that ourselves, but I'm pretty convinced that, give it 3 years or so, there would be something significant there. But I think the question then is, what's the underlying asset? What's the quality of it? Because in carbon, the greenwashing issues and so forth, what we're seeing is, and it's sort of the core of it, there isn't all that much public carbon trading in the voluntary market going on at the moment. Most of it is direct. So the big tier ones or even tier twos and so forth, they go to their project managers and say, can you please do this for us? And when you're ready, can you let us know what the credits are? And the reason they're going to the length of doing that directly is they don't trust the public trading system, because the underlying assets are not clear. And if somebody, and we hope it's us, gets to the point of verifying and at scale tracking the accuracy of the statement that's in the token, then it can really go to token. Then it can really go to public trading. And I wouldn't say we don't mind, because public trading, I think, is going to be pretty fragmented. There's a lot of players there already. In the tokenization blockchain side, it might just have an opportunity to get bigger scale faster. So it's a fascinating topic.
Yeah, absolutely. We could spend an hour
how much time?
talking about the metaverse and crypto, Web3, and all that
Indeed.
jazz, but we don't have the time for that.
Indeed.
So one of the things as we're looking at winding down, Rolf, a great discussion. You and I already sense we can chat forever, and we'll have to do that at some point in time. Indeed. I would be remiss not to ask Linda Force, Linda Scout, Linda Planet. I'm going to bet Linda is somebody's pet, cute, cuddly cat. I got to ask, because I know our listeners must be like, this Linda, who is this Linda person? Is it actually
thing? So there's an acronym for it, which, I barely mention, but I barely can remember, and I won't repeat it here. But the truth of the matter is, a big customer of ours said, don't call this the Pro 2000, take a simple name. And then Jarkko said, my daughter's name is Linda. So that's how it came about.
Love it. That's amazing. Yeah. Sometimes it's as simple as that. So I was close. Cuteness factor 1 million, right? For sure. Yeah. Jarkko's daughter, yeah.
In the defense of, all credit to the customer, I think we were on a path to call it something like, like a German car would be called, 3 digits, numbers, a couple of letters, an S at the end. We were definitely on that path. And then that came up and we really liked it.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's an awesome story. So as we wind down, thinking of the digital foresters, we're seeing in our analytics a young crowd that's listening to this, and even people like outside of the space. But thinking of the unique value proposition of CollectiveCrunch, how would you summarize that? Like someone looking to engage with you and they're like, I'm hearing, the greenwashing term you've used, there's all these different things. I feel overwhelmed. What would be that UVP that you would communicate to those folks to say, just give us a call, because this is how we're different. What's your pitch?
Accurate and timely information about your forest at scale.
Love it. So, perfect. Awesome tagline there, UVP. Beautiful.
That's not going to be the trick, but if you're a big forestry player and you want to know what's going on, you want to track your forests in an automated fashion, you want to know exactly and scientifically proven, how accurate it is and so forth, that's us.
For sure. So on that note, what's the best way to get a hold of you, Rolf? For you, LinkedIn, Facebook, email, website? What's the best direct way to get a hold of you?
I'm on LinkedIn. The email address, maybe we can put this somewhere here. On LinkedIn certainly works. My email is rs@collectivecrunch.com. We have an info@collectivecrunch.com. We monitor these channels very diligently. Those are the key channels. For
awesome. So rs@collectivecrunch.com. I always like to say it because then people don't have to look it up. Yeah, and you've been great. I reached out and you're very quick to respond. Initially, I was like, this must just be like the generic inbox. I won't hear from Rolf. And you're like, hey, it's Rolf. I'm like, oh, awesome. That worked out well. So, hey, thanks so much for joining the Digital Forester podcast. I loved it. Amazing time learning about CollectiveCrunch, the Linda product suite, or Linda solutions, if that's the right way. And I'm still disappointed it's not this cute cuddly cat, but happy to hear that it's an actual person, and there you go. But thanks so much for joining us, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation as well. And best of luck, and I'm hoping to maybe connect in person one of these days and exchange more ideas together.
Connecting in person would be awesome. Thank you very much for having me. I think you're doing a fantastic job with the podcast.
Awesome. Thanks, Rolf. We'll talk soon.